when silence became a choice. For most of human history, silence was not peaceful, intentional, or meaningful, because silence meant absence, danger, or death, and sound was the only proof that life was still present nearby. To understand when silence became a choice, we must return to a time when humans filled the world with noise for survival, calling out to locate one another, warning of threats, and making sound simply confirm existence in a hostile environment. Sound was a connective tissue of early human groups. It signaled presence, communicated emotion, and maintained awareness of proximity that kept individuals safe within the collective. To be heard was to be alive. To be silent was to be missing. Early humans vocalized constantly. Sounds marked presence. Noise deterred predators. Silence invited uncertainty. A quiet space meant something had gone wrong. The absence of familiar voices triggered alarm long before any visible threat appeared. In dense environments where sight was limited, sound was a primary tool for maintaining group coherence and spatial awareness. But slowly, something unexpected happened. Humans began withholding sound deliberately, not because they were afraid, but because silence itself started to serve a purpose. This shift did not arrive through insight or philosophy. It arrived through necessity. Certain situations rewarded the absence of noise more than its presence, and humans, being adaptive, noticed. Hunters learned that quiet brought prey closer. Groups learned that stillness avoided attention. Listening became more valuable than calling out. Silence shifted from absence to strategy. The act of not making sound required a new kind of discipline, a suppression of the instinct to vocalize that ran counter to everything earlier survival had demanded. Choosing silence meant overriding a deeply embedded behavior in favor of a calculated alternative. This was not the disappearance of sound. It was the introduction of restraint. And in that restraint, humans discovered something new about control, attention, and awareness that would quietly reshape how the mind worked. Restraint required awareness of one's own behavior, a kind of self-monitoring that had no precedent in the purely reactive world of instinctive vocalization. To be silent on purpose, one had to first notice the impulse to make noise, and then choose not to act on it. This internal negotiation between impulse and decision was itself a cognitive milestone. Because once silence would be chosen, it stopped being empty. It became meaningful. As silence became intentional, it began reshaping human awareness, because choosing not to make sound forced attention inward and outward at the same time. The suppression of one's own noise amplified the perception of external noise. The world became louder precisely because the listener became quieter. Without constant noise, humans noticed details they had once missed. Footsteps on soil, wind through grass, breathing nearby. The world became sharper when sound was reduced. Sensory acuity increased not because the senses themselves improved, but because the interference of self-generated noise was removed. The environment revealed itself in layers that constant vocalization had obscured. Silence changed hunting first. Waiting replaced chasing. Observation replaced reaction. Success depended not on strength, but on restraint. Control over the voice became control over outcome. The patient hunter who could remain motionless and silent for extended periods gained access to opportunities that the noisy, impulsive hunter never encountered. Silence became a competitive advantage, rewarding discipline over aggression. This restraint carried into social life. Silence began signaling focus, caution, and respect. Moments without sound gained meaning. Pauses shaped communication as much as words did. A deliberate silence before speaking conveyed weight and consideration. A silence after someone else spoke conveyed attention and acknowledgement. The absence of sound became a communicative act in itself. Listening evolved. Humans stopped speaking simply to fill space. They waited. They watched faces. They sensed intention. Silence allowed understanding to deepen beyond language. When one person stopped making noise, they created the conditions for another person's communication to be fully received. Listening, in its truest form, required the listener's own silence. But this shift created tension. Silence could mean safety or threat. Absence of sound demanded interpretation. Humans had to learn when quiet meant peace and when it meant danger. The ambiguity of silence introduced a new form of cognitive work, requiring the mind to assess context, read environment, and make judgments about the meaning of absence rather than presence. This uncertainty sharpened perception. Mind stayed alert. Awareness expanded. Silence trained attention in ways noise never could. The brain, deprived of the constant input of self-generated sound, became more sensitive to subtle signals. Patterns in the environment that had been drowned out by vocalization now became detectable. Over time, silence became associated with thought. Reflection required quiet. Decisions felt clearer without distraction. The inner world grew louder as the outer world softened. Humans discovered that reducing external stimulation created space for internal processing, a space where memories could be reviewed, plans could be formed, and emotions could be examined without the pressure of immediate response. Silence was no longer emptiness. It was a tool, and tools changed behavior. As silence settled into human behavior, it began reshaping thought itself. Because once the world grew quieter, the mind had space to speak. Without constant sound, humans spent more time inside their own awareness. Thoughts lingered, images replayed, questions formed without needing immediate answers. Silence created continuity between moments. The stream of consciousness, which had previously been fragmented by constant external engagement, could now flow uninterrupted for longer periods, allowing more complex and sustained trains of thought to develop. This internal space changed decision-making. Humans could pause instead of react. They could imagine outcomes before acting. Reflection became possible in ways noise had always interrupted. The capacity to delay action while considering alternatives, a hallmark of sophisticated cognition, depended directly on the ability to create internal silence, to quiet the impulse to respond immediately and instead hold the situation in mind long enough to evaluate it. Silence also altered power. Those who control when to speak and when to remain quiet gained influence. A pause could command attention. Withholding sound could create tension. Silence became a form of communication as powerful as words. In group dynamics, the individual who spoke less but more deliberately often carried greater authority than the one who spoke constantly. The strategic use of silence became a social skill with real consequences for status and influence. Cultural meaning followed. Quiet moments gained ritual importance. Silence marked respect, danger, mourning, and thought. Not speaking began to say something. Communities developed shared understandings of what different kinds of silence meant, embedding the practice into their social architecture and transmitting it across generations. But silence also carried risk. Without sound, misunderstanding grew. Intentions could be misread. Quiet could isolate as easily as it could protect. A silence intended as reflection could be interpreted as rejection. A pause meant for consideration could be read as hostility. The communicative ambiguity of silence demanded a level of social intelligence that not every interaction could sustain. This dual nature created conflict. Silence demanded interpretation. Humans had to learn when to trust it and when to fear it. The skill of reading silence, of understanding what the absence of sound meant in a given context, became as important as the skill of reading speech. Yet the mental shift was irreversible. Once humans discovered the value of quiet, constant noise felt intrusive. The absence of sound became something to seek, not avoid. The preference for silence in moments of deep thought, careful decision, and emotional processing became embedded in human psychology. Silence had moved from survival tactic to mental space. And in that space, the modern mind was quietly forming. The climax of silence becoming a choice was not quiet itself, but a control it gave over attention. Because once humans learned they could choose when not to speak, they gained the ability to slow the world down. Silence created distance between impulse and action. It allowed space for judgment, restraint, and intention. That distance, measured not in meters but in moments of withheld response, became the foundation for deliberate behavior. This shift reshaped how humans related to themselves. Thoughts could unfold without interruption. Emotions could be examined instead of instantly expressed. Awareness deepened as noise receded. The inner life became richer because silence gave it room to develop, to layer, to accumulate the complexity that distinguishes contemplation from reaction. Silence also reshaped society. Conversations gained rhythm. Power shifted to those who knew when to pause. Meaning formed not only in words, but in what was left unsaid. The spaces between statements became as significant as the statements themselves. Even today, this discovery defines modern life. We seek quiet to think, to focus, to recover. We fear silence when it forces us to confront what noise keeps hidden. The mind still responds to absence as strongly as it does to sound. Silence was never empty. It was space, and space is where choice lives. The moment humans learn to choose silence, they learn to choose how they think, how they act, and how they respond to the world around them. That choice is still shaping us now. When